Hi, my name is Denise Willet. I work for Achievers. We are passionate about employee experience, and that's what we focus on every day, employee engagement. I lead the team here in London for Achievers, and we have the pleasure of working with companies globally and right here in the UK who put their people at the heart of their business strategy. And I have a topic to talk to you about today that I think actually could take more like 4 hours, but I'm going to try to wrap it up as quickly as I can. I do need a clicker, I think. Oh, right here, perfect. When I get given this topic, employee experience, employee engagement, how do you leverage tech, AI, and the human experience and bring that all together, I thought, wow, okay, this is a big topic. So I'm very interested and passionate about talking about this. If you want to talk afterwards, Achievers is at booth 1, and you're welcome to come over and have a chat with us. But I wanted to start with what we focus on at Achievers, and that's employee engagement. And I'm certain many of you in the room have long seen stats around this, whether the state of engagement in Britain is 8%, 11%, it was 17%. We need to focus and work on this. And we spend a lot of time, energy, effort, and money on employee engagement. In fact, here in the UK, 2 of every 5 employees are actively disengaged. And what that means is if you had 5 people rowing a boat, 2 of them are actually trying to sink that boat, while 1 person is in the front, rowing like crazy with one hand, and this boat's just going in circles. So how do we stop that? We know we need to stop it because there is a significant amount of money in lost productivity and revenue in lost productivity. And when employees are disengaged, you can see it. If any of you may have at some point in your careers felt disengaged yourselves or walked into an organization where you felt that vibe, or even in our own daily lives, calling maybe a service provider, and you know the person on the end of that line is the difference maker. How they feel about their job is the difference maker for that service. The customer experience is never, ever going to be better than how the employee is feeling. And if you have a low Glassdoor rating, you can imagine trying to be a recruiter who is recruiting for that company. Everything in today's workforce is so visible. It's online. You can't hide it. But conversely, when on the other side of things, when employees are engaged, you also feel that. I am so lucky to work with many organizations that have very highly engaged workforces. And when I walk into their organizations, you can feel that vibe. I feel it within my own organization when I walk in. So this is where we're trying to get to. And it's not just about having happy employees, because that's all well and good, but the goal is that more highly engaged workforces actually have better business outcomes. And we see this time and time again. So this is a Gallup study that shows that companies who are more highly engaged outperform their peers in earnings per share. But there's mountains of data as well that shows us that it's not just that overall performance, but every single day. Higher performance, higher sales, better CSAT, lower safety incidents, lower turnover. And these are the benefits that you can reach when you have a highly engaged workforce. So with all that in mind, it does make sense how much time, effort, energy, and money that we spend and invest in trying to make employee engagement numbers go up. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. This is a study by Foswig Group right here in the UK, and your peers are saying that 70% of the current systems in your organizations are not working in the space of employee engagement and with the modern workforce. This is Josh Burson. Josh talks about the fact that that our consumer lives, we have this expectation now of technology that has been set by our consumer lives. I travel a lot. I get my Heathrow Express ticket online, probably, midnight, the night before I'm traveling. My Air Canada e-ticket is on my phone. It's all in my wallet. I don't have to think about it. It all comes together so easily. This is an expectation. This integration of all these applications and technology is an expectation that is being created by our modern world that Lee and Doug talked a lot about. And new employees are coming in expecting this kind of technology in the workforce, and they're just not seeing it. And I want to talk about the employee experience. So Jacob Morgan is a best-selling author. He's wrote books around the future of work and the employee experience advantage. And I really liked this model around employee experience that he has designed, because it really fits well with what we do from a technology perspective at Achievers. So what Jacob talks about is that on the one side of the employee experience, it's all about what employees, from their perspective, what their needs and wants are, and what they're expecting from an organization. And on the other side, it's the organization's perspective of how they're designing that entire employee experience, what that should look like every step along the way, from your very first interview to post-exit. And when I think about how that comes together for Achievers, on the one side, we've got listening. So the employee engagement, or the employee, what they expect, what they want, and what they need, if we're not listening to that and acting on a regular basis, we simply don't know what that looks like. And then on the other side, how we design what we expect and how we communicate that, from our perspective, is all around recognition that aligns the company or organization's values to what the employee's values are. And from a listening perspective, the good news is many organizations are already doing this, right? Are most of you doing an employee engagement score on a regular? Yep. How many once a year? How many do it, say, quarterly? Okay, so a few people are getting that more regular consistency going, which is great. Because I can tell you, we know leaders don't need more data, and HR doesn't need more data. How many of you have mountains of data? How many people, this is going to be a hard question, but how many people don't run a survey more regularly because if you had more data, you wouldn't have time to do anything with it? I see a few hands going up. This is actually something we hear a lot. We'd like to run it more often, but we don't have the resources to tackle it from an HR perspective. So we need to enable our leaders. And less than 30% of leaders are actually taking action on engagement data, not because they don't want to, because they don't know how. I personally, in past careers, have received employee engagement data and thought, okay, what now? This is interesting. Now I know more about my team, but I don't know what to do with this. So I really don't believe it's because managers don't want to do anything about this. It's because they don't know how. And that's a real problem, because managers actually account for 70% of the variance in how employees feel on a day-to-day basis. And engagement is fluid. It changes regularly. How I felt about work yesterday is different than how I feel today, is different than how I'm going to feel next week. And managers affect that. So Doug and Lee talked about the pieces that the human factor that you cannot get rid of, and this is one of them. Employees want to know, and they want to hear from their leaders that what they're doing is on the right path and that it makes sense. So our approach today to engagement, actually, if we're doing it once a year, we are assuming that it is static, that it doesn't change, that it's generic, that it's one size fits all. If we do one or two really large organizational changes, that's going to impact employee engagement for everyone across the organization. And the reality is we need to take a different approach. We need to take an approach where engagement is fluid and where it's personal, where we can really address that on Jacob's model, the wants and the needs and the expectations of each and every employee. So we've got the data, we need to go through it, we need to translate it, and what we're not doing as much as we should be today is delivering that information in real time. And if you look at this quote from Forbes, And at Achievers, I really don't believe that employees are tired of filling out surveys. I don't think they have survey fatigue. I believe they have inaction fatigue. They're telling us what they want, and they feel like we're not doing anything about it. Yet we in HR are killing ourselves, bending over backwards, trying to do everything we possibly can to make this work. And yet the employees are feeling like that's not what's happening because they're only seeing change on a yearly basis. Now let's get into the tech and AI piece. I want to introduce you to Allie. Allie is our active listening interface. She's always on, she's personalized, and she serves up bite-sized actions. But I want to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Allie actually works with the human factor. So we talked about on-demand surveys. Some of you are already doing this. So Allie is a suite of tools, and one of those is the ability to push out on-demand surveys, but not just surveys in themselves, surveys backed by science. So our Workforce Institute, with 20 years of research, has looked at the key 15 questions that are the very top indicators of employee engagement. That, combined with some unique organizational customizable questions, are these on-demand surveys. And Allie serves that up, but then what she does is she works directly with the managers. So she doesn't just send all that data up to HR and say, HR, please go and make this work. She sends that data to George. George is a manager, and he gets a personalized dashboard of exactly what's happening with his team, key elements of what need to be talked about on his team. And Allie actually coaches George through a step-by-step understanding of the top hotspots and the top highlights of what's going on with his team, and suggests 2 to maximum 3 actions that he needs to take in person with his team. Suggests a meeting, even gives the content for the meeting, and serves up a PowerPoint presentation that George can leverage. George has no time. He wants to act on this. He doesn't know how. Allie, backed by AI, helps him understand exactly how to do that and makes life easy and saves time. So now we've taken employee engagement. HR always has that kind of oversight and needs to drive those large organizational changes. This is important. But we've also now taken it down a level and put it onto George and helped George be more successful. And I want to show you what Allie does. She takes it to the next level, and she actually helps employees be more successful. So Allie is always listening to employees, ready to speak at any time about what's happening in their day-to-day life. She also can suggest personalized outcomes and things that an employee can do. So for example, if an employee told Allie, I really wish we had more along the lines of wellness, or I want to be more engaged in wellness, Allie can suggest, well, did you know that our organization actually has a cycle scheme? Why don't you participate in that? Or hey, here's some white paper around employee well-being and wellness. So Allie can actually start to enable employees to take their own engagement into their own hands. I want to talk about another aspect that is a really key element in employee engagement, and that's recognition. So the most highly engaged and high-performing workforces have recognition as one of their top drivers and putting people at the forefront. And this is a Harvard Business Review study, and Harvard talks about recognition given for high performers being the #1 trigger of employee engagement. Employee engagement, there are so many tools and tactics, and that's a huge black box of employee engagement. It's been talked about, but recognition being the simplest and the #1 trigger. So really impacting in that intrinsic motivation of employees. And if you look at the triggers under that, it's really around transparency, communication, aligning employees' their goals with business goals, and really breaking down the barriers. And this is a study of one of our own customers, 200,000 employees. And you can see here that those employees that were recognized at least 12 times a year have a 17% higher engagement score. So it's not good enough to do it once or twice a year from a recognition perspective, as similarly to listening. And the kicker here is this is completely non-monetary recognition. So this customer did this by just tapping into the intrinsic motivation of employees and every recognition being aligned with a company value or a company objective. So what would that look like for an employee? Let's assume Lucy, she's a fairly new starter. Doug and Lee talked about the fact that employees are going to have 5 different careers, not just roles. We know this to be true with the modern workforce. And Lucy's pretty new, so we want to do what we can to keep her around as long as possible. Lucy just received an email from George that invited her to a meeting around the Pulse survey that she answered a couple of days ago. So she's really excited because she's thinking, George cares. He's actually going to talk to me about my feedback. That's fantastic. Lucy's able to, all within the same platform, or maybe outside of the platform. Maybe she's sending recognitions or answering her survey on her mobile. She's recognizing out of her email. Perhaps she's recognizing out of Salesforce, if that's where she lives, or off SharePoint, the internet. So really, recognition and employee listening, living in the flow of work. So here Lucy's recognizing one of her employees for being a key helper in a project that she's working on. So Lucy's feeling super engaged about that. We really believe the future of employee engagement, it must be real time, it must be personalized. We can't treat every employee like one answer is going to solve all of their engagement problems. And it's got to be bite-sized. It's got to be every day, in the moment, in the flow of work, and addressable. Because we believe that in the future that employee engagement will actually be driven by the employee. That's it. Any questions?